Have you ever sat under the relentless sun, sweat dripping down your face, muscles screaming in protest as you hefted another stone? And when you finally looked up, you saw no end to the massive wall that stretched into the horizon before you. That's exactly what the Israelites were experiencing, except it was far worse than any modern construction site. They were slaves in ancient Egypt, and their taskmasters had just given them a new quota, one that seemed impossible to achieve. But they had no choice. If they didn't meet the quota, the punishment would be terrible. But why were they building these huge walls? What did they hope to achieve with such massive structures? And how did they go from being a small family of 70 to becoming slaves in ancient Egypt? Join us as we answer these questions and more in today's episode. 030 Population Growth. Back in the days of our grandparents, we used to hear a lot about the stork. It was believed that babies came from storks, and we never questioned it. But as we grew older, we learned the truth about where babies really came from. Now, just like the stork, the human population also seems to multiply out of nowhere. One moment, there are 100 of you, and the next, there are 200. But in the case of the Israelites, their population growth was astronomical. Initially, only 70 descendants of Jacob entered Egypt with him. But 4 centuries later, their numbers had swelled to over 600,000 fighting men, with the total population exceeding 2 million. This was a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. He couldn't understand how they reproduced so quickly, filling the slave quarters with noise and laughter. How can they bear children in these conditions? How can they find the strength? He cried out, more out of fear than curiosity. The advisor who had suggested the brutal labor stood beside him, his face impassive. He had seen the birth rate among the Israelites and was starting to panic. He knew the king feared their growing numbers, but he hadn't realized the extent of his paranoia. 136 Brutal labor conditions. The king was pacing, his face creased with worry. He was surrounded by maps and reports detailing the growth of the Israelites, their births, marriages, everything. The advisor watched him nervously, knowing that if he didn't come up with a new solution soon, the king might resort to simply killing all the Israelites. But what could he suggest now? The king wouldn't stand for any more half measures. We must stop their reproduction, the advisor blurted out, before he could stop himself. The king stopped pacing and turned to him sharply. How can you stop people from having children? The advisor swallowed, his throat dry. There are rumors of a strange Hebrew rite, circumcision, he said hesitantly. If we force them to abandon this practice, it will surely slow their growth. The king nodded slowly, considering this. It's worth a try, he finally said. Do it. The taskmasters, often former slaves themselves, were brutal. They wielded their newfound power like a weapon, driving their people to despair. Each day, they herded the Israelites to the work sites, whipping them into a frenzy of activity. The Israelites, stripped of their dignity, became mere tools of the kingdom's glory. The walls grew taller, wider, becoming an oppressive presence that loomed over the land. But life went on. Babies were still born, their cries mingling with the sound of hammers. The ruler, however, wasn't appeased. He felt the same unease. He felt the same unease as before, as if the Israelites' defiance was palpable in the very air he breathed. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the slave quarters, whispers of rebellion were beginning to stir. The Israelites, though broken, weren't yet ready to surrender their hope. They held on to their faith, their families, and most importantly, their will to be free. In the midst of despair, a plan was hatched. A plan to strike back at the taskmasters and break the chains of oppression that had held them for so long. Little did the ruler know that his tyranny had only fueled the fire of rebellion, and the Israelites were preparing to rise. What do you think will happen next? Will the Israelites successfully revolt against their oppressors? Or will the ruler find another way to keep them under control? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you for watching. About the Israelites, he pointed out that their numbers had far outgrown those of the native Egyptians. And if war broke out with their enemies in Asia, the Israelites could side with them, causing havoc for the kingdom. Look at the Israelites, he said, his voice laced with concern. They're more numerous than we are, and if war comes, they might back the Asians. We need to do something about them before it's too late. His advisors, a mix of old and young, exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the king was right, but what could they do? Eradicating 2 million people was unthinkable, but keeping them as equals wasn't an option either. After some time, one of the advisors, a cunning man known for his sly solutions, spoke up. My king, why not use their strength against themselves? Force them into labor, drain their resources, and break their spirit. Then they won't have the power to rebel or join our enemies. The king turned to him, a glimmer of interest in his eyes. Go on, he urged, intrigued by the idea. The advisor leaned closer, whispering a plan so devious it would make even the gods weep. K. 106. Fear of Israelite power. The advisor's words echoed in the king's mind like a prophecy. He realized that keeping the Israelites as equals was a folly. Their sheer numbers posed a threat that couldn't be ignored. He remembered stories of other civilizations toppled by the very people they had underestimated. He didn't want to be remembered as the ruler who let his empire crumble because he feared the Israelites. So, he decided to take action. But what kind of action? The advisor's suggestion echoed in his mind, offering a potential solution. Using their strength against them, he mused. It was an ingenious plan, almost too good to be true. He wanted the Israelites forcefully relocated away from the populated areas to remote work camps near the deserts of Pitham and Ramesses. There, they were to construct massive walls that would stretch across the barren landscape, serving as a constant reminder of their subjugation. The general, a man of action, didn't question the king's motives. Instead, he began making preparations for the cruel task ahead. At the slave quarters, whispers of fear rippled through the community. Families were being torn apart as husbands, wives, and children were being dragged away from their homes to work on the Pharaoh's new wall project. The journey was arduous, and many didn't survive the trek. Those who did arrived at the work camps, greeted by the haunting sight of thousands of Israelites already there, toiling under the merciless sun. The general had set an unfathomable quota, one that ensured no one would leave alive. Every day, they were forced to move massive stones, each weighing several tons. For many, this was their fate now, to die under the scorching sun with a wall of their own despair around them. But despite the horrors, life went on. Families continued to grow, even in the darkest corners of the slave quarters. Babies were born, their cries echoing the pain of their ancestors. Newborn boys were circumcised, a painful reminder of their heritage and a symbol of their resilience. But in the eyes of the ruler, every birth was a threat, a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. The scene shifted to the royal court, where the king sat on his golden throne, sipping his spiced wine. As he watched the dancing flames of the eternal lamp, his mind raced with thoughts of rebellion and revolt. He had hoped that by forcing the Israelites into labor, he could break their spirit, but their population continued to rise, mocking his efforts. He had hoped to drain their resources, but their families thrived even in the harshest conditions.